On the broadcast tonight, house and home foreclosures are up sharply in this still sputtering economy, and it's not getting better. The finish line now in sight for Supreme Court nominee Sonia Sotomayor and what some Republicans came close to admitting today. New hope for people with diabetes and where it will likely come from. Name change. If you give a landmark a new name, does that mean people are going to call it that? And a sharper image. 40 years later, we're now getting a better look at that giant leap for mankind. Nightly News begins now.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. It has not been the lead story lately, but it came roaring back in a bad way today. Home foreclosures are up in this country, and despite a lot of efforts to improve the housing picture, which after all started the mess this economy's in, it is not getting better. The number is a bad one, another 1.5 million foreclosure filings through the month of June. That's up a full 15% nationwide. Not what anybody wanted. We begin here tonight with CNBC's Scott Cohn. Scott, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. For all the glimmers of hope we've seen in the economy, this is just the opposite because housing is so important and the housing market is still in trouble.
Americans are now losing their homes in record numbers. 1 in every 84 at least threatened with foreclosure this year. Among them, it hasn't worked. Lenders have been flooded with calls, but so far, according to the Treasury, just 325,000 homeowners have been offered modifications under the program.
The program is still in its very early stages, and I think it's important that we give some time to work before we revisit whether refinements are necessary.
But even that may not be enough to counter the worst housing crisis since the Great Depression.
Government programs to help foreclosures and help homeowners are just not big enough to manage that kind of problem.
And every foreclosure hurts the whole neighborhood. One study says if the trend continues, property values nationwide this year could drop more than $500 billion.
What's to stop it? Well, there's talk about more aggressive loan modification programs, maybe letting distressed homeowners stay in their homes as renters. But to some degree, experts say this is a result of a housing market that just got completely out of balance, Brian, and it could take years to correct.
Scott Cohn at the global headquarters of CNBC for us tonight. To start us off, Scott, thanks. The questions are over for Judge Sonia Sotomayor. She appears to be headed for confirmation to the U.S. Supreme Court. Today also saw a line of witnesses, pro and con, including some of the firefighters in her most controversial case. Once again tonight, our Justice correspondent Pete Williams standing by at the court with more. Pete, good evening.
Brian, it seems likely tonight that Judge Sonia Sotomayor will be on this court within a few weeks. The top judiciary Republican now says he will not support any attempt to delay a final vote.
I just want to ask you up front, do you think
many Republicans today appear to be rehearsing what they'll say when it comes time to vote. South Carolina's Lindsey Graham said Judge Sotomayor did not seem to be an activist.
I think fundamentally, Judge, you're able to embrace a right that you may not want for yourself, to allow others to do things that are not comfortable to you, but for the group, they're necessary.
Though other Republicans remain unconvinced.
Your judicial record strikes me as pretty much in the mainstream. You appear to be a different person, almost, in your speeches and in some of the comments that you've made.
And one question today about an especially divisive issue produced a one-word answer.
Do you believe that the court's abortion rulings have ended the national controversy over this issue?
No.
In all, 2.5 days of questions for Judge Sotomayor. When that was over, others took their turns. Firefighters who sued the city of New Haven, Connecticut, turned out to oppose her. She was among the judges who ruled for the city when it threw out a test that would have qualified them for promotion, but not African-American firefighters.
I think we all had the expectation when we took the test that the test would be fair and job-related, and that it was going to be dictated by one's merit on how well you did on the exam, not by the color of your skin.
Among those supporting Judge Sotomayor, former Major League pitcher David Cone, who praised her decision ending the 1994-95 baseball strike.
I believe all of us who love the game, players, owners, and fans, are in her debt.
The committee could vote on her nomination by next week, then on to the full Senate the first week in August. Brian?
Pete Williams at the court in Washington for us tonight. Pete, thanks. It did not look like the streets of a civilized city this morning, and it happened not far from here in Jersey City, New Jersey. 5 police officers were shot. 2 suspects were killed. Police say a man in a priest's outfit pulled out a shotgun, fired it from hip level at responding officers as backups in body armor rushed to get bystanders out of the way. An update tonight and another turn in the story of that double murder in Florida, the adoptive parents of so many special needs children. Last night, police recovered the safe that was stolen from the Billings home there. Well, investigators also found what they say was the second vehicle used in the robbery and one other important discovery.
We have located several guns in various locations, one of which we believe is the murder weapon.
7 men have been arrested on murder charges. An 8th person, a woman realtor we told you about here last night, is charged now with being an accessory after the fact. Authorities say other suspects told them her van was used to hide weapons and the safe. The U.S. military is stepping up efforts to find an American soldier missing in Afghanistan for 17 days. He apparently wandered from his base on the front lines and was captured by the Taliban. Today, the Pentagon released images of leaflets it's been dropping in the region. One of them reads, quote, "One of our American guests is missing. Return the guest to his home." On the reverse side is a phone number to call for information. Now to the latest sign of the tensions a lot of European nations are grappling with as the Muslim population grows. In France, the president, Nicolas Sarkozy, has called for an outright ban on the burqa worn by a lot of Muslim women. Sarkozy calls it a prison, says it's a sign of women's subservience, and declared it not welcome in his country. Our report on this tonight from NBC's Donna Friesen.
You see them in Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, the niqab or burqa, that completely changing, and no laws can alter that. Donna Friesen, NBC News, Paris.
When we continue here on a Thursday night, big advances in treating diabetes and for better quality of life for some patients. That includes one patient in the news this week, and later celebrating what happened 40 years ago that changed how we look at our world forever. There is some hopeful news tonight for the thousands of Americans diagnosed each year with type 1 diabetes. Advances in treatment are improving their quality of life as researchers work toward that cure. You might not have known it, but one of those patients has been front and center on this broadcast all week. Our report tonight from our chief science correspondent, Robert Bazell.
During her confirmation hearings, Judge Sonia Sotomayor has kept 2 cups in front of her. One is Miami.
A young man in California will have something extraordinary to say when people ask him what he did on his summer vacation. He's 17-year-old Zach Sunderland, and today he became the youngest person ever to sail around the world alone. His trip ended in Marina del Rey, where it started 13 months ago. That's 2 summer vacations. He says along the way he survived foul weather, engine trouble, sleep deprivation, pirates, and perhaps worst of all, loneliness. When we come back, an American landmark gets a new name, and not everybody is happy about it.
There it is. Don't blow this.
Here in New York, not far from the Avenue of the Americas, which will always be 6th Avenue, there's the Metropolitan Life Building, which will always be the Pan Am Building. Names have a way of sticking on our landmarks. We tend to like some things the way they were, as they may be about to find out in Chicago, where they renamed the landmark Sears Tower today, whether people call it that or not. NBC's Kevin Tibbles has our report from Chicago.
Dominating the Chicago skyline for more than 35 years, the tallest building in America today has a new name.
Call it the Big Willie for all I care.
The Sears Tower is no more. Now it's the Willis Tower.
Who is Willis?
Sears, that's catching on.
Willis Tower. Wasn't the name changed?
You've been cheating. There is one thing that won't change at this Windy City landmark, the spectacular view from the top. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News, Chicago.
When we continue from the RCA building in New York, Apollo 11, 40 years later. Is it possible it looks better today than it did back then?
Let me play among the stars.
It has happened again after a picture-perfect launch for Shuttle Endeavour. The pictures of the launch show debris breaking off the fuel tank, strips of insulating foam peeling off. NASA says it has no reason to think the damage is extensive, just some dings, as they like to say in the space program. But to be sure, the astronauts are using a device with a laser tip on it to see the extent of the damage. Long before there was a shuttle or a space station, there was Mercury, then Gemini, then Apollo. And 40 years ago today, Apollo 11 left for the moon. The astronauts were chasing a promise, don't forget, a goal set by JFK to get there before 1970. They made it, and they changed all of mankind in the process. And now we're getting a fresh, better look back at that mission 4 decades ago. Our report tonight from NBC's Tom Costello.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
This is how 600 million people watched Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin take their first steps on the moon through grainy, distorted black and white images. Now, 40 years later, this, a 21st century digital makeover of Armstrong's first steps, of Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder before and after with far more detail and clarity.
Beautiful view. Is that something?
Of planting the flag before and after, the scarred surface of the moon far more vivid.
Here, men from the planet Earth.
And reading aloud the plaque on the lunar lander, you can make out the astronauts' faces as they read President Nixon's words. The original broadcast from the moon pushed the limits of 1969 technology, transmitted more than 200,000 miles to 2 tracking stations in Australia, where the signal was converted to a broadcast image, sent on to Sydney, then beamed to California, relayed to Houston, and rebroadcast to the rest of the world.
We're very happy that we were able to present any television, whether it is snowy or ghosty. It was a historic event.
But NASA also had bad news today. It now believes the original cleanest recordings, 45 tapes, were likely erased in the 1970s or 80s by mistake. So it's now working to digitally enhance all the existing Apollo 11 video. Also today, for the first time, an incredible peek inside the command module. NASA has now posted on its website all the private conversations recorded between the astronauts inside their spaceship, including this exchange as they approach the moon's mountains and craters for the first time.
Oh, there's a big mother over here, too. Come on now, Buzz. Don't be afraid of this big mother. Give him some scientific name.
Even the mundane conversations captivating. 40 years after NASA's greatest accomplishment, the Apollo 11 mystique lives on. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
And one more thing, perhaps this will help people remember now what an amazing, outlandish idea it was to go to the moon in the first place. Listen to David Brinkley of NBC News the night before the launch 40 years ago today.
And to say that somebody is about to land on the moon and walk around on it while almost everybody on Earth watches is just about too much to swallow. I almost don't even believe it. But it's true. And if this is not a permanent, enduring event in human history, then nothing is. And it certainly will be remembered as long as mankind remembers anything.
He was right. And so good night, David. Good night for all of us here at NBC News. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams. We hope to see you right back here tomorrow evening. Good night.
Honored for overall excellence, winner 5 Edward R. Murrow Awards. Now nominated for 13 Emmys. Most watched NBC News.